So I'm going to hand over to Gabe, who's going to take you through the ancient Greek language. Thank you so much.
All right. Hello, everyone who's here. Yep, I'm Gabe. I love Greek. Josh loves Greek, but not enough to stay for my talk as he has to leave.
I do love Greek, but
You have a thesis to write.
yes, I have a thesis to write.
Well,
You've all heard about two languages tonight. One is hieroglyphic Egyptian, which I think for most people listening and most people in the room probably is extremely exotic and almost alien. And the wonderful stuff Camilla had to say about how reading a hieroglyphic text is a three-dimensional experience, you know, like the numbers for the years of that pharaoh literally cascading down that stela that we looked at. And then Kieran guided us through Latin, which is, to be fair, sort of the default ancient language I think that a lot of us are exposed to. We probably all went to high schools and primary schools that had Latin mottos. Harry Potter has like kind of fake Latin in its spells, which makes you cringe. And so the thing about Greek is sort of in between these two languages, I find, that it's got this exotic element to it, not as exotic as hieroglyphic, but you know, the alphabet seems different and you know, the words seem a little bit less recognizable. It's when you hear people pronounce authentic ancient Greek like Attic Greek, it sounds a bit quite strange. But also it's a bit more familiar than hieroglyphic Egyptian, isn't it? It's you know, we all learn about things like, you know, Socrates and Plato and, you know, the Hellenistic period and things like that. And so because ancient Greek is sort of stuck in this middle ground in between Latin, it's super familiar for a lot of people until they start trying to learn the grammar, and then they start losing their hair, if they have any left. So basically, because it's in this sort of liminal space in between a familiar bunny ears, ancient language like Latin, and a really strange alien one like Egyptian, what I want to do with this talk is to basically show you that actually Greek has a lot of stuff that's quite familiar and accessible to us as English speakers that we can work with, while also still being extremely rich and mysterious. And so we're going to go through the grammar a bit, like how Kieran guided us through Latin, but we're going to do it fairly quickly because a lot of it is similar to Latin. And instead, we're going to look at the things and features of the language that are scary and the things that are not so scary. And I'm looking at the horrified face of someone in the room who's currently studying Greek. Yes, there are some scary things. Now, the reason why we're looking at a chart here, this is not a pie chart, as you can tell. That's not what pie charts look like. It's a Proto-Indo-European chart. So
different sort of pie.
Different sort of pie, much more delicious pie. So this is one of the things that, by the way, my colleague Grace originally put together this slideshow for me, and kudos to her for starting with Proto-Indo-European, because it's both, it's really something that once you get your head around it, really, really helps with Greek. Because yes, Greek seems like an alien language. It's all Greek to me, right? That phrase literally comes from Greek. But it's actually related to a lot of languages that we're exposed to all the time because it's a Proto-Indo-European, it's an Indo-European language. So Proto-Indo-European is a reconstructed language that was never written down, but we know it exists because we can see familiar features in it in all of these other languages, like Germanic languages, like English and German, Faroese is up there, Romance languages like Latin and modern French and Spanish, and as well as Hindustani languages like Urdu or Hindi, Slavic languages, Russian, Polish, Iranic languages like Farsi and Tajik. And so when we combine all of these similar features, we can reconstruct this language Proto-Indo-European, even though it was never written down. And Greek is full of features that we see in other Indo-European languages. So when you read Greek, and we're going to come back to this, you'll see it happen again and again and again, that there's a word that seems familiar. And if you look into it, you'll see, oh, sure enough, it's descended from the English word, or this French word, or this German word, or this Sanskrit word, it's descended from the same language. So there's actually a lot more familiarity to Greek than might seem at first, but you just sort of scrape the surface of it. Now, so that's one thing about Greek that seems scary but is familiar. This next thing about Greek seems familiar but is actually kind of scary. When we think about Greek, we think about the classics, don't we? We think about the dialogues of Plato. We think about the Attic drama. We probably also think about the New Testament and the Greek translation of the Old Testament. You know, the overwhelming majority of Christian scripture was originally written in Greek. But the fact is, the corpus is actually much larger than that. In fact, the corpus of ancient Greek is larger than any other ancient language. In fact, if you were to add up the corpus of, and I can say this now because Camilla's left the room, although the statistics back me up on this. If you were to add up the entire corpus of ancient Egyptian that survives across, the various stages of that language, combine them with Latin, combine them with Sumerian, Hebrew, and throw another couple of languages in, you would probably only get up to about half the size of the ancient Greek corpus. It is by far the largest corpus in terms of the amount of ancient Greek that survives. And that's for a few reasons. One, it was in use for a very long time. We have these stages of it. We have Linear B documents from the 15th to the 12th centuries in the Bronze Age. So this is the stuff that was found at Knossos, for example. These ancient Greek tablets written in a different alphabet altogether. We have poetry from the Archaic period, like Homer and the lyric poets. And we have the classical corpus, like I talked about. And then we have a millennium of post-classical material, not just biblical material, but we have medical texts, we have philosophy, we have prose novels, we have post-classical poetry. And then, of course, like what Grace was talking about before, we have the enormous amount of documentary evidence. More than 1 million ancient Greek papyri have been preserved under the sands of Egypt, and as of yet, only about 40,000 of them have been published. If you want to find a corpus of unpublished material in an ancient language, Greek and Akkadian are the two that will provide you with a lifetime of lifetimes worth of material to translate.
The oldest Roman.
Sorry?
What's the oldest Roman?
It comes from I believe it's like the 6th, 7th century.
That's the fifth one we talk about. It actually is quite late, but the oldest piece of Latin we have is about 1,000 years after the oldest piece of Greek, about 800 years, if you're including Linear B. So that's something that you thought was simple, but is actually kind of scary. Here's something that you probably think is scary, but is actually quite simple, which is the Greek alphabet. So one of the things that I hear the most when people talk about learning Greek is they're kind of scared of the alphabet. Now, as someone that, as a group that was just exposed to hieroglyphs about an hour ago, I think we can all agree that this is nowhere near as scary. The fact is that the Greek alphabet, 80% of the time, is the same as our modern version of the Latin alphabet that we look today. There's only a few letters that are distinct. And the reason for this is that actually Latin alphabet is an old West Greek alphabet. The Etruscans got it from Doric colonists in Italy. They gave it to the Romans modified it, and over the medieval period added some letters, and then we have our modern Latin alphabet from that. Another great thing about the ancient Greek alphabet is that it's phonetic. Now, what that basically means is that one letter represents one sound. If you know what the sound value of that letter is, you know how to read it when you see it written down. Now, you might think, well, of course, that's how alphabets should work, but no. Many alphabets don't work that way. For example, English. If you look at that middle square there, you'll see that the sound E, that's a long E sound, can be spelled about 20 different ways in English. We have city, bee, seed, ski, machine, algae, key, beach, bee, to seat, people, key, volley, field, hygiene, amoeba, dengue, and begin. All of those E sounds are spelt differently. Anyone who's attempted to learn English as a second language is probably triggered right now. I'm sorry to dredge up those memories, but it's not a problem with Greek. Learn your letters and you'll know how to pronounce the sounds. There is one exception to this rule, which is that over time, the Greek pronunciation did change. So for example, if you look at the sentence written on the left, in 5th century Athens, the left of the bottom square, it would have been pronounced something like Eandroi poikaloiesin ukestikine hekale. About 1,000 years after that, it would have been Eandri ikalu isin ukesti yimi ikali. So you have quite a compression of the phonology. Now, This is only going to be an issue if you want to read these papyrus documents or these inscriptions that we were talking about, because what they did in Greek was they liked to keep their spelling the same. The way that it was phonetically spelled out in classical Athens, they kept spelling their words this way by convention, even down to modern Greek, down to today. But less educated authors would often make phonetic misspellings that you're only really going to be able to understand if you know about these sound changes. But that's a niche issue and shouldn't be a problem for too many people. Something that will be a problem for quite a few readers of Greek is the polytonic accentuation system. What is a polytonic accentuation system? It basically means you have a whole bunch of squiggly lines and dots that you can write above or below your letters to tell you how it was pronounced. Now, there's quite a few alphabets that we have in use in like for European languages today that have polytonic accents. French has, I think, 2 different accent types.
The U and the other one.
Yeah, the other one, exactly. But Greek goes even further. Greek has 3. It has the acute, the grave, and the circumflex. Now, the acute was traditionally thought to denote a sharp rise in pitch, nomos. The grave was traditionally thought to denote a subtle rise in pitch, so something like toetos. And the circumflex was traditionally thought to denote a rise and a lowering in pitch. Greek had this kind of cascading accent that it would sometimes use. Now, the reason why they needed to mark this was because sometimes the only difference in the meaning of a word would be indicated by what the accent is doing in that word, where the accent is and what type of accent it is. So for example, look at these 2 nouns we've got here. And this is on the handout, actually, if you need to refer to this later on the second page. Nomos is a pasturage or a region, but a nomos, it means law or region. You need to know where the accent goes to know what these very different words, which of these 2 very different words you're dealing with in the Greek text. It can get even more complicated than that when it gets to the accentuation of Greek verbs. So look at these 3 examples here. We have, I'll do a classical pronunciation. We have paideusai. That's a command. That means learn it. But then we have paideusai. That's an infinitive form. It means to teach someone something in the aorist tense. And then we have the form paideusai. And that means would that he or she would teach. It's an octative form. It's a very unreal form. Now, this is something that, at a glance you might think, oh my God, that's so complicated. But I just want to offer you guys this sort of small sort of crumb of optimism that imagine if they hadn't invented this accentuation system. If you were a native speaker, you would know. But fortunately, in antiquity, they developed this system of polytonic accentuation to help learners of Greek know how to pronounce the word so they knew which word they were reading. And so that actually makes our job more manageable today as modern readers of this ancient language. Now, speaking of words, there's another thing that's quite scary about Greek that a lot of people don't talk about. Greek has an enormous vocabulary. The ancient Greek language offers us lots of words that we need to get across. The standard lexicon that we use, which we call the LSJ, that stands for Little, Scott, and Jones, the 3 primary editors of this lexicon. It has 116,000, nearly 117,000 head words. Now, that's a lot. For reference, the quintessential Latin dictionary, the OLD, has about 40,000 head words. So there's 3 Latin dictionaries for 1 Greek dictionary, not that we're comparing. Again, to put that into perspective, it could be worse. The Oxford English Dictionary has 600,000 head words. So it's not as bad as English, which is a theme that you can see is a recurring theme for this talk. But this does present some difficulties. One of the reasons why there's so many words is the same reason why the corpus is so large. Greek is used over such a long time, and you get new words coming into use and old words dropping out. And then sometimes it comes full circle and old words will be resurrected. In fact, this happens a lot. So if you want to say the word for donkey in the classical period in Greek, you would say onos. That's a donkey. Now, if you're in the post-classical period, so if you're talking from around 300 BC, let's say the first few hundred years of that phase to about 1 BC, 1 CE, around that, you would use the term hypozygion, which literally means a yoked thing, actually.
In modern Greek, it is gaidaros.
There you go. But before we got to modern Greek, there was an extensive period of almost half a millennium where they decided they preferred the classical word again. And so if you're reading something from the Roman period, particularly from the 2nd century CE on, you're more likely to see onos come back. So you need to learn 2 words for donkey, or 3 potentially. Now you can see also that there's an extensive vocabulary that has very specific usages in Greek. Greek is really wonderful in terms of how specific its words can get. If you have a pain in your chest and you're going to the doctor in ancient Greek, the doctor asks you, where in your chest are you experiencing this pain? You could tell them just with one word that it's in the steatos, the upper torso, the sternon, the center of the chest, the mastos, 1/2 of the chest, or thorax, the general chest area. It hurts all over my chest. You could also just use any of these words to just refer to your chest in general. There's a pain in my chest. My heart is breaking. You'll see authors use any of these terms. So what I'm saying is you're going to have to get used to looking up words if you want to read ancient Greek. It's just something you're going to have to get used to and not be too frustrated by when you look up a word only to find, oh, it's a synonym of another word that I didn't read. Now, syntax. Okay, this is something, we're back in the territory of things that people traditionally thought scary about Greek, but I actually think isn't too bad. Now, syntax, it just means word order, how we string words together to make sentences. Now, like in Latin, there is a flexible word order. In fact, it's even more flexible than Latin. Greeks were kind of more loose and carefree with that sort of thing, unlike the very rigid Romans who like to have fixed rules for things. So for example, look at this example sentence I've got in the top left. There's hoaner tonele panta sta. You can probably see a theme with Kieran and my example sentences. So hoaner tonele panta sta. The man eats the elephant. Hoaner is a man and he's the subject. Tonele panta is the object. And sta is the verb. So it's a lot like English in quite a few ways. The subject is first, and then there's the object. The difference is the verb is at the end there. It's a bit more, it's the man, the elephant, he eats. But we can kind of read that in order and understand the meaning. Look at the next example. Ton elepanta estie hoaner. So if we read that word for word in English, it's the elephant eats the man. Okay, on elepanta, the elephant eats the man. But it's actually what it means in Greek is the elephant is the one the man eats. The man is still eating the elephant. It's just the emphasis is on the elephant. Okay. Now this is something that Greek can do because, like Latin, it has a very rich system of morphology, which we're going to get to with the next slide. But so that seems scary. But there's things in Greek that are actually quite easy, in my opinion, like when we have clauses. So we have conjunctions in Greek, like when, until, so, because, in order to, right? These are conjunctions in English, and we have them in Greek. And Greek does a thing just like in English, which is you're talking, and then you want to introduce a clause, like a temporal clause, when something happened, purpose clause, in order that something would happen. And so you introduce that clause with the conjunction, and then you keep on reading, and everything that happens after that is what's in the clause. So it's actually just like English. Look at this example at the top, temporal clause. Emeinan, sorry, accent is wrong. Emeinan, I waited. Heos elte, until he came. And see, heos is our conjunction, and then we get the clause after that. It's just like in English. Now, you might take this for granted, but actually there's quite a few languages that don't work this way. I've studied languages where you'll only know that something is in a clause because of a tiny little particle they throw at the very end. Or in Hittite, where you only know that a clause is happening because of particles that they smoosh into the beginning of the sentence. So we should be grateful that Greek is actually quite a lot like English here. Now, let's go to the morphology. This is why we can have such flexible word order so often. Greek has a very rich system of morphology now, like Latin. Morphology is basically how words change to tell you what's going on with the grammatical function of that word in the sentence. English has almost no morphology. We use word order for almost everything. In fact, it's easier to name features of morphology that we do have. We chuck an S on the end of many words to say they're plural, And when we indicate the subject and the object only in pronouns. He killed him. I don't know why I always go for killed, but anyway, he ate him. She spoke to her, okay? This is morphology. In Greek, everything undergoes morphology, okay? Verbs, nouns, adjectives, the word for the, it all undergoes morphology. But something that Greek does that is kind of friendly with this morphology is it likes to reuse its stems. So this is the central chunk of the word that tells you what the lexical idea, the dictionary meaning of the word is. And it likes to reuse these stems again and again and again and again and again for different words. So for example, look at log, okay? This word log. You can get the word logos from it, which means word. It's a word for word. But then the stem leg, that's actually the same stem. Don't worry that the vowel is different. The lug is what tells you that's the same stem. And that's where we get verbs like legomen, we say. So you can see how, even though the morphology is different, something that's staying the same in Greek is the stem. It likes to keep reusing stems. There's some other examples there. Tima can become time, honor, and also timao, I honor someone. Elpid can become elpis, hope, but also elpizo, I hope. So if you get used to looking at your stems and learning your stems, you're going to start being able to predict what words might mean. That's when you don't recognize the stem and you have to look it up in a dictionary only to find that it's a synonym of another word you already knew because there's so many words, but still. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time going on over this because Kieran has basically explained this in great detail for us with Latin. Anyone who's doing Latin will have a bit of an edge when they move on to Greek because the case system is very similar with its nouns. In fact, it's reduced. Latin has more cases than Greek. So Greek is easier, right?
Suddenly.
Kind of, yeah. Now, also notice the amount of declensions. So declensions are basically just groups of patterns for how nouns will form these cases, right? So for example, there's three. These are all nominatives, but see how they seem to have different endings. Time, that's a nominative of the first declension, but then logos is a nominative of the second declension. So that's why we group them into different declensions. These cases will be marked by different endings depending on what declension they're in. But Greek only has a few declensions, so you're only going to have to learn a few case endings compared to Latin, or say Hungarian, which has like 26 cases. Verbs. Now, so here we are. This is the scary thing. Can't beat around the bush here. It's hard. Maria's, one of the Greek students in the room is so crestfallen right now because she's currently suffering through this. Greek verbal morphology is extremely rich. So what I'm saying is Greek verbs can form all of these different wonderful ways. And you saw that a bit with that example before with the accents. There were those even the accent will change the meaning of a Greek verb. Now, for example, the paradigmatic verb, that's just the verb that you learn as an example verb. So you can learn your endings, the different tenses in Greek is luo. Now, in theory, this verb luo can take something like, it's written down somewhere here in the handout. It's a ridiculous number of different forms. I can't find it, but you can, 238 different forms of the verb luo, yeah. So that means there are potentially 238 different ways that luo, the verb luo, which means to loose or to free, can form. But you're not going to have to remember all of these because there's patterns. Basically, what the Greek verbal morphology is doing is just telling you the person is at first I luo, second you luo, third he, she, or it luos. Is it singular or plural? Is there one or is there numerous ones? There is a third option for when you're just saying two people do something. It drops out early on in Greek, so you only really need to learn it if you want to read like Homer or some other poetry and some of like Plato. But it's good to know that it's there because you might meet it after you've forgotten it exists and you'll be very confused. There is a dual number. There's 6 different tenses. There's 3 voices, active, passive, plus a middle voice. So the dog speaks to the elephant, active. The elephant is being spoken to by the dog, passive. And then the dog is speaking, middle. Okay, so Greek has a separate voice just for that. And we've got the moods, which we've got the same three that that Latin has, the indicative, subjunctive, and imperative, and then there's a sneaky, scary fourth one, the optative. And if you think that's too many moods, so did the Greeks. They actually stopped using the optative around the 1st century CE, but annoyingly poets and like educated Greeks wanted to show off how good their grammar was by continuing to use it in like their treatises and whatnot. So actually, if you're reading Byzantine literature, you might still need it. Now, so you might be thinking, oh my God, that's just too much to deal with. I can't handle it. Well, there's a system that you can use that will help you with the Greek verbal morphology. And it's basically accepting what's hard and focusing on what's easy. So for example, look at these two examples in the middle, luo and luso. Okay? One is the active forms in the present tense. That's the first line, luo, lues, lue, luomen, luete, luusi. And then you have beneath that the same in the future, luso, luses, luse, lusomen, lusete, lususi. They're obviously very similar, aren't they? Right? So they're using the same endings there, even though they're in a different tense. Okay? And this is a pattern that's going to keep repeating itself with Greek verbal morphology. You're going to notice that there's endings, there's suffixes, there's things that get reused again and again and again and again. So as you start learning about Greek verbs, really what you need to focus on is not the 250 whatever different forms that it can take, but rather the much reduced set of moving parts that Greek uses to form its verbal system. Okay. So that's a journey, that's something you'll undergo as you start learning Greek. I won't go over that in detail here, but it's just good to know that up front, that there is a system that makes it easier. Okay.
It's just that sometimes the parts move a lot.
Yes. Now the thing that, so that's the thing that's easy. The thing that's hard, well, you basically need to learn the stem of each Greek verb 6 times. When you learn a Greek verb, you need to relearn it 5 more times. And that's because part of these different moving parts that Greek uses to form its verbs, one of them is the stem. And sometimes the stem will change in ways that you just can't predict. Sometimes it's easy, like look at the example luo in the top line of the bottom square there. So these are its 6 principal parts, its 6 different stems that you can meet. Luo, luso, elusa, leluka, lelumai, elutein. So you're super familiar with Greek yet, but you can see things that are pretty similar there, right? And you can see how there seems to be an underlying system that you could use to kind of help you learn your different stems, right? There's always a new, it seems like there's a logic to it. Well, look at the example below that. The first 4 principal parts for the verb of carrying in Greek, pero, I carry, okay, not too bad. What about the future tense? Oiso. What? And then the aorist, the past tense, the simple past, goes to enenkon. And then the perfect goes to enenoka. So this is the thing in Greek that is just hard. I can't give you any kind of like secret tool for making it easy. You need to learn each Greek verb 6 times. You need to learn the stem 6 times. Just get used to it. Get used to learning your 6 principal parts. All right, now tools, these are the good tools. Okay, not all of them are good, but these are the tools that I recommend you use for Greek. Smith, that's not pronounced Smythe, it's Smith. Herbert Vere Smith. He wrote a comprehensive grammar of Greek and English in 1956. That's the more revised edition. It's excellent. Everything in there, everything about the Greek language you need to know is in there, except for the stuff about the Greek language that we don't know about yet, which is why people that do thesis, the topics for their thesis like me exist. We've still got more to learn. And then I've already mentioned it, there's the lexicon, the LSJ. So that's, look, that is a monument of Victorian scholarship. It's a huge lexicon. It's full of fantastic information, very flawed, but that is what we have to work with. That is our Greek lexicon, our first port of call. The textbook we use here at Macquarie is Lushnig and Mitchell's An Introduction to Ancient Greek, a Literary Approach. Mitchell edited the first of the volume, which Lushnig wrote. She was a fantastic academic based at the University of Idaho. She was apparently she recently passed away, but she was apparently a wonderful teacher. Not all of that shows in the textbook she wrote, unfortunately. It's imperfect. But it's what we use. And to tell you the truth, as someone who's learnt a few languages by now, you don't need the perfect textbook. You just need a textbook. Grab it, learn it, and then learn its flaws as you go. And look, I'm here. I've learnt a lot of Greek, and I use the Lushnik. So That's my statement on blockchain. And yes, there's the PALAIA digital library. Basically, the Greek canon is enormous, but about 90% of the literary canon, 80%, can be found online on the searchable Greek database of Greek and Latin text, PALAIA archive made over at Tufts. It can be a bit difficult to search in Greek. You don't have a Greek keyboard, but there's very good YouTube videos out there that just teach you how to use a text parser that's built into the website to search in Greek on PALAIA. Yes, and actually, Logeon isn't on that list, but everyone, if you want to do
It's on Kieran's.
it was on Kieran's list, Logeon, that online dictionary that Kieran had on their list, is you can use that for Greek as well. It's a Greek-Latin online database, and it's very good.